The presenting sponsor of Moon Tower Soccer is FVF Law.
To find out what makes FVF a different kind of injury law firm, you can visit fvf.law.
Hello friends, thanks for listening to Moon Tower Soccer. This week we'll be joined by longtime MLS journalist David Goss. We'll preview the match this weekend against Nashville after a weekend off. And then we're going to answer a few more listener questions. My name is Landon Cottom, and I'm joined once again from a hotel room by Jeremiah Bentley.
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Jeremiah Bentley. I'm in Orlando at the, I think it's called the Marriott World Center, at this insurance conference with 6,000 insurance people. And one of the things I learned today, because this probably says something about insurance people, and so my coworkers who are listening, maybe you should fast forward through this, but so apparently this hotel sells more alcohol over this 4 days than any other Marriott in the world during any 4-day period when you have like 6,000 insurance people at a conference. And I don't know what this says about the industry, but here's where we are. And then we had a chance to talk on, it was Sunday, we're in this Golden Boot, which is a goal scored league with a lot of friends of ours and guys who listen to the show. And so as I often do, I was somewhere like on my phone and distracted. So I was like laying by the pool with a beer in hand, trying to do my draft and just like listening to you guys complain about your like sports ailments. So I think, you'd hurt something or icing something, and I don't know, you could walk or couldn't walk. Like, how are you doing?
I had an ice pack around my leg for most of that draft. No, I'm learning to cope with the struggles of aging, Jeremiah, in that if I get hurt, I probably shouldn't just try to jump back into physical activity as soon as I kind of feel okay.
Yeah. So you learned this lesson the hard way, right? Did you jump back into physical activity?
Yeah, but it was like, I thought I was being responsible by doing like the gentlest of a weight workout. And the next day could barely walk because the injury was re-aggravated. So I guess I learned I just need to like sit in a chair with ice on my foot for 2 weeks. And then I can maybe start walking the dog again.
Maybe you can walk around. Who was it? Was like, we were playing like a bunch of guys that were over 30. So clearly it was like a very easy.
It was Mark. Mark,
of course, it was Mark.
Not quite 30, I don't think. Said he played he's like, I played a game this morning, and it was against an over 30 team. And like the way he said it was like, It didn't count. It was too easy. And almost everyone else on the call is over 30, and some of us being significantly over 30.
Yeah. Well, good for Mark. I'm glad they won. And if I remember where his team is, like I feel better about where I am in the table on that league than what Mark is. All right, let's talk about what happened this week. So this week was the close of the MLS acquisition window.
And we got 2 new players like we thought we were going to, right?
I know. And I feel like this would not even be news except for Josh Wolff. And a strange like moment of optimistic teasing talked about Austin adding 1 or 2 more players, which made everybody excited about what was to come in this window, even though it was like a really solid window overall to begin with. And Austin did get, FCito did get 1 signing. They picked up a new player who was he's Irish, right? He's an international.
Yeah. Peter Grogan from Ireland, playing in the Irish second division. He's 19, but the Irish second division is quite a low level. Like the Irish first division is not a super serious league, really. And so not sure what to expect from this player. His numbers in the Irish second division in a small sample size were really good. But yeah, not sure what he's going to look like coming into a different environment, but not a first team player for sure.
And then the other news we got, which we're going to get into like in depth with David Goss, I don't think we need to talk about a lot of this off the front, is because this is MLS and this is the way things do. Clubs had to declare whether they were going to use either 3 DPs. What is it? It's like 3 DPs and up to 3 U22s, or 2 DPs and up to 4 U22s, but you had to declare it by the end of the window, and you declared it only for 2024. And it feels like most of the teams took the other way, the 3-and-3 model. But what we got was an announcement that Austin had done the 2 and 4 model before we got an announcement officially that Austin had bought down Alex Ring to only have 2 designated players, which is like created, I don't know, a little bit of interest and chaos for a few hours before the club clarified that with a later release.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the like why this happened with Goss, but I think for now we can maybe just clarify what it is. So we chose this 2 DP 4 U22 things and are now compliant with that because we bought down Alex Ring down from his DP contract. So what it means right now is Alex Ring is no longer a DP for the rest of the season. We technically have extra U22 spots to use, but we don't have roster spots to use them, and the transfer window is closed. So it doesn't really matter. And it doesn't, like, we'll get to choose again at the beginning of next year. And so this doesn't mean we're necessarily going to only have 2 DPs next year. I would guess we're probably unlikely to only have 2 DPs next year. I could be wrong, but it could change and probably will change in the offseason.
Yeah, and unless you be worried for Alex Ring, that buying down Alex Ring means anything in the real world, it's just like Garber bucks and spreadsheet math. So Alex Ring's actual, like, nothing changed about how much money he's getting paid or terms of agreement with Austin. And then the other thing that Austin did was agree to a trade with Atlanta United, which Austin received $75,000 in 2025 GAM in exchange for a 2024 international roster slot. Again, it's just for 2024. It reverts back to Austin. And next year, so Austin picks up a little bit of value for next season while not giving anything up because there was no more players coming in because there were no senior spots available. The one other thing that's released that I don't think we talked about in the interview is that they mentioned that the additional $1 million that Austin got in GAM out of making this move is already being applied in 2024. So right. I think we kind of touched on the why, and Goss had a theory about it that made a lot of sense, but we didn't get into the specifics of it.
Yeah, this is all just really strange because there's a lot of stuff in MLS rules and all the weirdness that happens within them where it's very much like, I gave you all the clues, Mr. Policeman. Like, if you'd read through enough CBA pages and read this and listen to this and do this, you can kind of figure out what's going on and why it's happening. This one is like literally impossible to fully understand without more information being made public about it.
Yeah.
Which is annoying.
It's annoying. I don't think we need to add any more on that. So I guess overall, I think I touched on this, but I felt really good about the window, about the offseason acquisitions. I think we've been pretty clear in agreeing that like every player that has been added by Rodolfo Burrell is better than the person that went out. So Austin ends up in the window with Bukhari, Dessler, Svatak, and we've already seen one of those. We've seen Dessler to be like an undoubtable upgrade to the team, and we've seen the talent from Bukhari. We haven't seen so much from Svatak. Matthew Doyle did his whole offseason ranking and gave Austin FC a B+, which seems really solid. Like, how are you feeling about this team coming out of this window?
Yeah, I think Joe Lowry on Backheeled ranked us 5th best transfer window in the whole league. So maybe a little higher than Doyle was. I really think it's a matter of your reference point when trying to grade this transfer window, and really any transfer window for any team. But if we're judging flatly on how many good players we brought in, I think this is pretty easily like an A-. Maybe it's down to a B+ just because we didn't bring in like any huge superstars that are like guaranteed game changers in the league. We brought in 3 guys who are like at worst above average MLS starters. And I think based on just that is really strong. I think where you can give it a lower score is if we're judging on how many positions of need were filled or addressed. And I think that's where you could give it maybe a B- or a B, like a B even. Because, like, I mean, in fairness, there are too many positions of need that need upgrading and not enough roster spots for it to, like, realistically be feasible in a single window for this team. So we're significantly better with these guys, but there is still a lot of work to be done before this team could be considered like a real contender. So I think it depends on which of those routes you're going to to like truly give it a score.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Like we've heard all along that it's going to take, I think it was 3 windows is what Burrell originally talked about in order to sort of rebuild this roster structure. And it seems like there's a lot of progress toward making Austin better, but it's definitely not all the way there. And there's still gaps in the last 9 games that are not going to be filled or not going to be addressed, which I think is a little bit of a disappointment. But I also appreciate that he did not make like a panic signing of an overpriced number 9 in order to like fill a short-term need that hamstrings the club for the long term.
Yeah, and I saw this kind of floated around a few places that anybody who's like upset with the window or maybe like giving it a lower score, like if Austin had signed these 3 players in the last 2 weeks, would they be more excited about it? I think the answer is probably yes, but it's really good that they didn't have to. That if they have any chance of making the playoffs, that they need these guys to come out of the gates hot. And so the fact that 2 of them got to play in a few games, the other one has been here long enough to realistically think he will play in the next couple of games. That's much better. Maybe less exciting than signing guys at 11:30 on the transfer deadline, but I think overall better and healthier for the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that sets it up, and we really do get into this in greater detail with the interview. So like, let's set the interview up, and let's take a break, and then we'll hear from David Goss.
Yeah, super excited. Goss made the time. Super smart guy. Really fun to talk to. And we kind of cover a lot of stuff from the transfer window, the rebuild, this weird Alex Ring thing, the academy. We kind of go all over the place. So excited for you to hear this. After we finish that, we'll come back and do Nashville preview and then answer some listener questions. So hang tight.
No one is around.
Moon Tower Soccer is brought to you by our friends at FEF Law, the official injury lawyers of Austin FC.
FEF is a different kind of personal injury law firm dedicated to community, transparency, and client education. And they have their own podcast called Summary Judgment. You can check it out wherever you get your podcasts.
You can go to fef.law to find out what makes FEF a different kind of injury law firm and why understanding your legal options can dramatically change the outcome of a case. Once again, that's fef.law. Amplify Credit Union is a member-owned financial cooperative that served the needs of Central Texans for over 5 decades. As a credit union, Amplify has no shareholders or parent companies. That means more of your money stays in the community.
Amplify has been the home of fee-free banking since 2022. Their free checking accounts come with 0 overdraft fees or minimum balance. That means Amplify's fee-free checking accounts help you get more mileage from your everyday spending.
Amplify membership is open to any Texas resident. Learn to trust your bank again at Amplify Credit Union. To learn more and to register for free parking at the Amplify Esperanza branch on game day, go to www.goamplify.com/moontower-soccer.
Moon Tower Soccer is again brought to you by Tony C's Pizza and Beer Garden, serving New York-style pizza and authentic Italian. Now open in Round Rock in front of Del Diamond and on Anderson Lane near Shoal Creek Boulevard.
Their Anderson Lane Beer Garden is just 2 miles from Q2 Stadium. Stop by for pizza and a pint before all of this year's home games. And with TVs on every wall, it's the perfect spot to watch all away games.
Tony C's has 30 beers on tap, featuring the Brewery of the Month High Sign, and their Seamus the Fiddler Irish Red, and Bob the Blueberry Blonde. And you can also check out their Pizza of the Month, the Hawaii 5-0, featuring prosciutto, fresh mozzarella, pineapple, pizza sauce, peppers, and fresh oregano.
Don't forget 2 for Tuesday, where 2 pizzas are the price of 1. That's every Tuesday. And then Pitcher Perfect Thursday, where pitchers are half price. Dine in or pick up for lunch or for dinner. More info at TonyC'sBeerGarden.com. All right. I'm very happy to be joined by, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass here, probably my favorite MLS pundit for the last several years now, and the host of Soccer Wise alongside Tom Bogert and Jordan Angeli. It's David Goss. David, thanks so much for being here. We're so happy.
I really appreciate that, although it's kind of like when you start something with no offense, then it's like, well, now I feel like it was blowing smoke up my ass. So I'm going to assume that's where we're at, but I appreciate that.
All right, I guess let's take a little bit of time off the top just to tell us about Soccer Wise and this new project you've started.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. So thanks for having me and thanks for bringing it up. And I would love for anyone to join us. So we're just trying to cover, for the most part, MLS and NWSL the way we think they should be covered. And I think one of the biggest issues is the lack of just content around these leagues. And if you're a fan, you don't really have many places to go, and it feels like it's getting less and less. So we're just trying to cover these leagues the way we think fans deserve it, and the way we would want them covered, or the way we do want them covered. And so I do a show live twice a week with Tom Bogert on Tuesdays and Thursdays to talk MLS, 2 p.m. Eastern time, on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and then out as a podcast. And then I do a weekend review show every Monday. And then Jordan Angeli joins me to do NWSL specific on Wednesday. And then we have other special shows we do. We've covered a lot of the USMNT and US Women's National Team and some of the youth stuff as well, live and breaking. But the idea was just to have a place that I think for a lot of us, we are fans of other sports in America or soccer in other countries, and you see the level of coverage and the amount, and we wanted to add some of that for MLS and NWSL fans. And you guys are lucky you're in a market where there's a lot of soccer vibe and it feels real. Other fans in MLS are not in those markets. So we wanted to help meet them there and help grow what has happened so far in some of the better markets. So it's just about having a place where when your team decides they're going to convert TAM into GAM, where are you going to go listen, and where are you going to go hang out, and where are you going to talk, and where are you going to be around other fans? I know for me, like, I grew up in New York, sports talk radio. When the Jets lose and the Mets win, the first thing I'm doing that night is I'm putting on WFAN to just be in the vibe and around other fans and just living in those moments a little bit longer. And I think for a lot of us, soccer has had that in a digital platform because that's where we've been able to connect to other soccer fans. And we're just trying to keep growing that and keep adding to it.
Yeah, well, so we have you on because we're an Austin show. And so, like, and what we love is, like, you have this perspective that's much broader than any of us are able to bring to it, because, like, a lot of us have just been Austin fans, like, since this MLS fans since this project started. So, like, just generally, when you think about, there was a build, Claudio Aranda maybe wasn't as great at his job as a lot of people thought, and so, like Rodolfo Borrell's been in to kind of tear it all down. Like, how do you feel about, like, what has the Austin rebuild so far, given it's like half a season in?
It's been slower maybe than I expected. And I think part of that is how bad Claudio Arena was at his job and some of the contracts that the team is stuck in. And I think that's the part that from afar has been a little underwhelming, where, like, when you're not in that market, you tune in when things happen and then, like, reassess and you watch for a little and then you get a feeling. It's what we're doing with New England right now, right? Who's flipping rosters and adding pieces and taking pieces away. And Austin, while there's been finally some movement in this summer, it's been a lot slower than expected. And so, when you guys reached out to me and I'm start thinking about Austin specifically, it's like, yeah, there's not a lot new to go find. We haven't seen Bukhari much, so we don't have a lot to go off of. And I think that's one of the problem with Leagues Cup is, like, you get all excited about a signing. They play 2 games at best, and then you're out for 2 weeks, and you've got nothing to watch. But it's just been really slow, and I think this team is a lot closer to last year's team than I would have expected them to be at this point.
Yeah, I think, to your point, one thing that's been maybe a little underappreciated or just, like, not known by a lot of folks just paying attention to MLS nationally is that Austin just didn't have the roster spots, and then so many of these contracts are so bad that a lot of these players are unmovable. Yep. Like, who's taking Julio Cascante on $700,000 or $800,000 that he's on? Who's taking Jossie Zardes on $1 million the way that he's looked the last couple of years? Like, nobody's going to take any of these guys for hands. And at this point, like, that's what has to happen to have more spots come in. So we're definitely, like, counting down the days. Like, hopefully we can get into the playoffs and get some type of silver lining on this season, but we're all mostly counting down the day to when a lot of these contracts are over, which not all of them are this season, but quite a few, enough to make a difference at the end of the season for sure.
Yeah, there was a lot of contracts that were signed for veterans that were long-term, which I think the reason a lot of them came to Austin was because it was the place they could get the most years or that most money. And when those don't work out, then you're stuck on the backside. Quick plug, if anyone's interested, at SoccerWise, we have depth charts and salary tables which have everyone's contract status, contract years laid out. I'm looking at it right now. So it's a very easy place to go and say, Giassi's artist on $1 million for 2024, 2025 with a team option for 2026. So if that stuff interests you, we have that for every team laid out. And it's a really fun one to look at. It is rare to see long-term contracts in MLS. Austin is an outlier in that way. These deals they've signed, like when you go in, we put the option years in purple. Normally you scroll through teams and it's like 24, maybe 25 options. And then you go into Austin and you look at Leo Väisänen through 2027 and Bureau and Gallagher, which I think is a good contract. And I think that's a good
Gallagher's
deal.
cheap.
Yeah, 375, having him secured. But you don't see contracts outside of homegrowns for more than 3-4 years normally.
So we were doing some listener questions last week, and we're going to do a few more this week. And I thought this one fit in well to some of the conversation I wanted to have with you. And so this question is from Robert Miller. He asks, given that Burrell's signings have done pretty well this season under Wolff, do you think Austin's problems are due more to roster build or coaching? And then second part of the question is, would you give Wolff a year with Burrell's new signings, like another year with Burrell's signings next year after the rebuild continues? Or would you try to bring in a different coach this offseason? So let's start, I guess, with part one here. Where do you put this Austin team and the troubles that they've experienced as far as like where the blame lies? Is it more to do with roster build, or do you see this as more of a coaching issue?
I'm going to say more roster. I think the injuries alone have been something that very few coaches, I think, could overcome. And then on top of that, you look at the lack of diversity in style of players on the team. One of the like bizarre parts about the team is Hadar Rion's like the only one who can stretch the field. Every center back has the same deficiencies. It is so odd the way the team was put together over the course of the years, in that not only do you have players in questionable contracts because of age and injury concern, but they all do the same thing, and not in a way where you're like, oh, we have depth. They do the same thing in a way in which you don't have the ability to change the game and play in different ways. And I think that's something that's hurt Austin a ton. I think some of that blame can go to Josh Wolff, which is he is single-minded in the way he sees the game. So I'm sure he has always leaned the signings into the type of players he wants, high possession players, short passing players, all of that type of stuff. But I don't think that's fully, at his feet. And that doesn't affect whether or not you think he can coach the new players coming in. And it's very obvious from the profile of players that have been brought in that Rodolfo Burrell sees this and is looking for new aspects in players that he's bringing in, Bukhari being the biggest one, a player who can stretch the field and can break down defenders and doesn't always need to connect and link up and have overloads and have more players in the area to create chances. So I would put most of the blame at that. I don't know if a coach can change culture then once they're already in. And I think that would be the concerning part, which is it's gotten a little bit rotten over the course of the last year. And you have moments where it feels like the team has given up. And so if you bring in new pieces, are you endangering the whole project by having someone there who maybe some of the players don't respect or don't connect with, or have already heard the message long enough and it can't get over it? I think that's the fear. I would say you give him the end of this year, because you're not going to sign anyone else over the course of the end of this year. And if Rodolfo Burrell is going to sign a new coach, he's probably got a couple names in mind. He's been around soccer pretty long, and he would get that done in the offseason.
So Burrell came out right out of the gates, full voice support for Josh Wolff, saying this is the guy, this is one of the reasons I came here. Who knows how true any of that is and how much he's just trying to kind of drum up support for the team. I like to imagine this scenario where Josh Wolff, in my opinion, is not a coach that's going to drag a team down so much. I think if Josh Wolff was coaching the Crew or LAFC, they would still be very good teams. Yeah. And so I think with a good roster, Josh Wolff could be successful. I don't know that he's necessarily a guy who is going to elevate a good team like we've seen other coaches do in this league. And so I would like to make a change. But you talk about Burrell maybe having a list of names. How many of those guys are in Europe? And does that mean we're going to have to wait until next summer to bring them in? And so I keep picturing this scenario where if Burrell has another window like he did this summer and rebuilds the team well enough that the team is so good that they're actually winning, and then he wants to fire Wolff, but then he's in a tough spot because like, oh wait, we're actually good. Does it become hard to fire a guy if you rebuild the team so well that they start winning?
Yes. I think this scenario in which he wants a European coach who would come next summer, I don't think Josh Wolff is the coach at the start of the year. So there's either an obvious interim brought in where it's like clear that it's an interim manager, whether it's pulling someone out of the academy that's local or someone from Rodolfo Borrell's past who's probably going to be an assistant for the next coach. The other odd part about this whole thing, and I don't know how Austin fans are talking about this, is Rodolfo Borrell's a coach. Like, that's a large part, if not the larger part of his background.
Yeah.
My understanding is he has been offered or had interviewed for MLS head coaching roles in the past before doing this. And so he'd already been in those conversations. I don't know if that's his desire anymore. So he could be the guy. And that's pretty simple to find to make sure he wants to be available because it's just himself. If that was the case, I wouldn't be shocked if he said, well, I don't want to manage this roster and like waits through the end of this year and then takes over. Or I wouldn't be shocked if the person he wants is already an assistant and could leave, because your assumption would be at the level he's been at and now asking someone to come into, it's going to be more of a pretty good example is Minnesota United signing Eric Ramsey, right? A young assistant coach from Manchester United. Like, here's a chance to be a head coach in a new world, like in a new setup, all these things. It's probably not going to be a head coach out of the Man City La Liga background that he's in. It's probably someone a little bit further down that he either believes could be better or has a relationship with already. But there are ways to set yourself up. Minnesota did it where you can have an interim going through. I couldn't see a world in which there's a name or a person they specifically want and Josh Wolff manages the team up until that point.
That's a really good perspective.
That's sorry, go ahead, Jeremiah.
No, I was going to follow up a little bit because you were talking about like WFAN and the Jets and the Mets. Like, one thing I think it's interesting that a lot of people that we talk to who have been like American sports fans for forever is just like the level of patience with a coach or a manager or even a sporting director and how different it is in this sport, in this world. And even now, like in the United States, like, can you expand on that a little bit? Because I feel like it's a new thing for a lot of people who are like, have followed expansion teams in the NFL or Major League Baseball. We're like, well, the guy coaches for like 7 years. And maybe we get good, or maybe they don't. And it's like not this way in soccer.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that comes from the background overseas of promotion relegation, right? So you get fired because your team has like basically lost, where there is a bottom in American sports because, well, you got the number one pick and Reggie Bush will make the team better next year and all those types of things. But there is still a culture, I think, now developing in MLS with expectations. And also people like Rodolfo Borrell who come from backgrounds where losing is unacceptable because it could end the club, right? There are clubs that go through relegations where they won't exist the same way that they used to. And so you have those expectations. And I think in MLS, with the way the salary structure is, it is fair for every team to expect to win because there is not that large a gap between the top and the bottom. And so what we've seen is rather than have the threat of relegation being the driver, it's the lack of success that's been the driver for a lot of firings. And MLS has, you hear all the time people say like, oh, well, you can build a real project, you get time, but it is one of the leading leagues in the world in terms of firings now and how quickly they happen and how consistently they happen and all across the season. There is like very little rhyme or reason to the moments that they occur. It's not always before the season, you know, in the off season, summer transfer window, then when you don't qualify for the playoffs. Like we see them in May, in June, in July, and all across until the end of the year. And so I think now for a lot of clubs, they look around and say, FC Cincinnati was the worst team in the league. And then 18 months later, they were the best team in the league. We should be competing. And if we're not competing, the quickest move to make is to fire the one manager rather than to go across and get rid of all the players, where then, you know, the NFL, if you have a quarterback or you don't, that's kind of the whole conversation. But in basketball, it's like, well, you swap one player out, you could change the dynamics of a team. That's a little bit harder in soccer. And so the easiest and most straightforward move to make is to fire a manager.
So I don't know how much everyone listening will know this, but David, you are like not exaggerating this. You like, or maybe one of the people who knows the most about American youth soccer in the country, is just from covering it. I know you announce games for all kinds of places, and then just followed it really closely. We wanted to get your take on Austin FC's, I guess, like academy and second team pipeline. So last season, Austin FC wins MLS Next Pro championship. This year, they end up moving off a lot of the guys who won that game or won that championship, brought in a lot of younger guys, players from the academy, other guys that they've brought in, and are, like, as expected, doing quite a bit worse. Where do you think the balance is in a development team? Like, is it okay to play kids in a league where they're going to get the crap kicked out of them for most of the season? Or like, does being competitive matter in a development atmosphere?
There is a balance that's necessary, and being terrible doesn't teach you anything. And like, yes, losing helps sometimes. And like, we all know the dream team had to lose one time so that you could get coached. That's not these kids' scenario. And it's, I think, been proven pretty strongly that the teams that just have no chance and the kids just get decimated for 2 years, most of those players don't develop out of those setups because you don't have anything you can learn positively. So it's like, yeah, you can learn, okay, last week this worked and this week this didn't work. And the veteran does it this way. But if you just lose every single time, you have no frame of reference to what would have worked or what could have been better. You also lack confidence. Like, soccer is so much about the mental side of things. And that's part of why, by the way, I think coaching changes a ton, because there's this belief that like teams that play with confidence, with the wind at their backs, where the game feels easier, all those moments, they will be successful even if the talent isn't there. So you have to give young players the opportunity to have that. And so you need to find a balance. And I think some of the best development teams have done that, where they've gone out and found a 25-year-old who kind of knows their place and where they're at and wants a little stability, or wants to live in that city, or is from the club. Because that's one of the things that's starting to happen now, is you have people who grow up in a club, go to college, play a couple years of pro, want to come back home or want to be a part of that club no matter what. You can also find players who are trying to get their opportunities, who believe that they are good enough, whether it's coming out of the CPL or USL or from Central America or the Caribbean or whatever it is, that are willing to come into the team and fight for their spot. And you put young players around those players, and it's not about winning championships, but it's about being competitive week to week so that the players can learn winning traits and can feel the experience of being a professional, but doing it the right way. Now, Austin was in a weird spot, and we've seen expansion clubs be in these weird spots, which is you're trying to catch up. Like, you don't have 10 years of academy players to push through into a second team. So you have to fill that gap with college draft players, some older players, some academy pieces out of other clubs. We've seen Columbus do this really well over the last 2 years, and Columbus has made the same move that Austin made, which is, okay, now we feel like our academy is strong enough, so we're going to move a lot of these pieces out, and we're going to push our own young players through. But you always have to do it with a balance. You always have to give those kids an opportunity to learn from true professionals, and that's like one of the keys to this whole setup. I think it's one of the great losses in MLS Next Pro is that you don't have the experience to then go and see pros at a Tampa and at a Detroit and at a Orange County or Vegas. And I think that hurts a lot of the players, but that's league stuff. You can only control your team. And I think to control your team correctly, that's what you have to do. I would say for that Austin team last year, there were a lot of really interesting pieces in that team. You don't need 12 of them, but you need 3 or 4 to be a part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting to see over the last few years. You mentioned like Austin just now are like the first academy class that came all the way through. Micah Burton was in that group, and he's 17, 18 years old playing with the MLS Next Pro team. I think there's one other kid that was in that initial class that played, I think, 1 or 2 games, and he's off to college now. But I'm curious to see if they can continue that continuity of, okay, yeah, there are a handful of kids that are not from Austin, did not come all the way through, but played several years in the academy and are now getting minutes with the MLS Next Pro team. If they can continue that pipeline, and actually now that there are some kids coming out the other end of it, if they can kind of keep the continuity going.
And they made the decision, I think, that a lot of clubs have made, where they started right at the U12s or U13s, and they grew each age group by pushing that group through. Not every club has done it that way. Some clubs start their full academy, and they just you try and find players to load in at those different ages. And we have seen Minnesota the most, and now it's like chaos with what Minnesota has done, where Minnesota did that and then sort of tried to get claims on players who they didn't develop, which is fine. Every MLS team does it. Every team in the world does it. And then try and find those players at 17 and 18 and whatever to accelerate things. But LAFC did the same as what Austin did, which was start with that 12 age group and then keep backfilling another age group as you push them through. But it means from the moment you start, you're probably 7 years away from a player making a difference on your first team. It is now, in this salary cap league, a loss of an asset, because homegrown players are now genuine pieces of a roster where they are cheap, affordable, mainly domestic players who can fill in and be game changers for your team and be good pieces for your team, while you then spend more money on the top half. And I think it's part of what's hurt Austin, and there's really no genuine way to accelerate it early on, which is they can't have a couple backup fullbacks and a starting defensive midfielder who are off the salary cap and off the books, so that you can spend all the money on a TAM center back. And I think Austin has ended up being spread a little bit too thin across their roster on some of their salary cap money, because they don't have the homegrowns as options.
We got to keep Josh around long enough to get the next Wolff into a homegrown deal.
I will tell you,
all Wolves.
I will tell you, I think Gavin's probably the best of the three of them.
Wow.
And he's clearly in a conversation right now, and he's very young, where he is like, because people always ask me, center back's such a problem for the U.S. The center back prospect pool is incredible for the U.S. across MLS Next right now. And some of the best players in MLS Next are center backs. And Gavin Wolff is at the top of that list with all of them. So yes, keep Josh Wolff around to get Gavin into the first team.
Okay, so we'd be remiss not to bring this up while we have your MLS expertise. One of the most MLS-iest things happened in Austin the other day. I've decided to name it The Day That Will Live in GAMfamy. I have a button for this. There we go. So Austin, where do we even start here? So MLS announced new rules recently where you can take one of two routes: 3 DPs and 3 U22s, or 2 DPs and 4 U22s. Austin announced that they decided on the latter of those two options. That therefore gave them $1 million in GAM. And it's kind of like the snake eating its own tail, that they needed to have 2 DPs to choose this one, but they needed the $1 million to get to 2 DPs. And so they got the $1 million to buy down one of their DPs. But all this happened at the end of the transfer window, when Austin has no senior roster spots. And then part of this move is they traded away their last international roster spot. And so I guess our question is, like, why did any of this matter?
It is a good question, and I might not even have the right answer. My guess from the outside is, so Alex Ring is that low-end DP that they bought down. He is like $100,000 to $200,000 off that DP number. My guess is the rest of the pieces in the roster were built in a way where the assumption was they were going to make this move, but MLS hadn't put the rule in yet, so they didn't actually get the allocation money. But the roster is built in a way in which the roster is over the salary cap number, and they needed the rest of the $1 million to buy enough pieces down to fit in. So my assumption being, you use the 100 or 200,000 you need to buy Alex Ring down, and then the rest went into Giassi Zardes and Matt Hedges, and what are the other pieces were, in which Austin knew coming into the window that they didn't have enough space in their salary cap, and that they were going to make this move to then clean up the salary cap book and be able to get under so that they could play out the rest of the season. And that might have gone hand in hand with some of the moves they made. Dessler's money may have been too much for them to really add, and they knew that they were going to use this money to buy it down. The issue for everyone in the league was MLS told everyone these were going to be the rules months ago and then didn't put them in place until the end. So there was nothing. Austin couldn't have announced this earlier because the rule didn't exist. And then MLS decided they were going to do this National Signing Day where everyone grabbed the hat of two DPs and 4 U22s at 3 and 3 and did the little joke thing where they picked which one, who knows? And so there was like no other time to have done it. But my guess is they've been operating with the assumption that this was money they were going to have and going to use the entire time they were working through the window. The only thing that's a little surprising is that they didn't sign other U22s. That's like the only.
We don't
other
have senior
part.
roster spots.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good point. Yeah, so you would have had to either buy someone out or trade someone.
And nobody wants any more
is
players.
the problem. Yeah, that is like the
Austin
main
has no.
issue.
Yeah.
It is wild when you do the like, oh, what we're like, especially with the injuries in the league, because Cincinnati has all the injuries at center back and all these things, and you're like, no one's coming to get these guys. This is not the place people are going to go hunting. Danny Pereira is the big one, right? They could basically sell him inside the league. And it sounded like that was the offer that came. Was it LAFC last year?
That was the rumor. It was never like widely reported,
Right.
but there was a rumor for sure.
That would be the way that you'd get out of it. It's kind of what Montreal did with Mason Toye and guys like that this window. And then on the flip side, what Toronto did to them, which was sold Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy, basically sold in league for $1 million in allocation money. But you have to have an asset. And my assumption would be Gallagher and Pereira, maybe Stuver as well, would be the only ones.
Yeah, I think it made some sense at the time, but in hindsight, I think it makes the Diego Fagundes trade make 100 times more sense.
Yeah.
When you look at the number he was on and his production during that year. If someone offers you $1 million, you take it. And because we're seeing now, like as many moves as we made, like how many of these would have not been possible if Fagundes was still on this team. So, So I wanted to, the theory that you gave, I think makes more sense, being that some of these new guys that we brought in pushed our accounting over what we could actually afford for this window. Some other theories that, I guess the one that I had was that they were actually trying to make some other moves happen and they needed this in order to actually make them happen. But those moves didn't come through. They couldn't get a guy out, so they couldn't bring a new guy in, something like that. The other one that Mike Cragnola brought up to me that I've seen floating around is that they wanted to buy down Alex Ring, but wanted to do it with expiring allocation money as opposed to, let's say, for instance, the Diego Fagundes money, just maybe that's still hanging around in their coffers. And they can, if you trade for it, you can use it again in the future. But this like new rule money expires at the end of the season. And so you want to buy down Ring. Here's a way you can do it with money that only exists this year as opposed to money you could use in the offseason.
But the question, I guess then, but in that theory or in that setup, you're probably still doing it for the same reason we talked about at first, which is to get the money for other guys. Because if you're just buying Alex Ring down, but you're not adding a DP, you don't need to buy him down. Like there's no reason to do it unless you need the rest of the $1 million in allocation to use for something else. Because otherwise you would just leave him as the DP for this year because next year he's got the team option. So like he's off that contract and he's gone after this year. I don't know if, and this is one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking to me about it earlier, and I haven't reached out to find from anyone. I don't know if you can restructure any contracts using the allocation. That would be the other thing, is if you said to Giassi Zardes, why don't we bump you up to 1.3 this year? We'll give you $300,000 out of our allocation so we can bring your number down next year, where they would in theory be making more moves and have more flexibility. I don't know if you're even allowed to do that. That would be the only other reason I could really see where you're saying, like, can we basically bite the bullet this season where we know we can't get better and we don't have the ability to make moves?
So you said that Ring is potentially out at the end of the season. If you remember, last year, he was on an option year also, but
Yeah.
it got auto triggered by like minute. I don't guess we ever got an exact reason why it was
Yes.
auto triggered, but it was auto triggered. Do we think any of this points to that Alex Ring has another auto trigger clause in his contract, and he's definitely we're definitely on the hook for him?
I can promise you from the conversations I've had that there is a board somewhere now in Rodolfo Borrell's office space that says, here are the auto triggers for every player's contract, because they seem to not be happy with the way that went down last year and felt like it was a little bit out of their control. The Rigoni stuff, right? We already saw it. Like, they refused to play Rigoni to not auto trigger his bonuses and some of those moves. So clearly they are now in place enough in a way to have read through all the contracts and figured out where all those moments are. But I will say it feels like Alex Ring's been on borrowed time for most of his time in Austin, and yet he somehow survived. So I'm sure we'll be having the same convo in about a year.
Maybe, yeah, no doubt.
We say it every week pretty much that Alex Ring is a perfectly fine player on half the money he's making and like not on a DP spot.
Yeah, he's
I
good at
gladly have
some
him on the
things.
team.
He's not great at anything, and he's not as good at all the things he used to be good at.
Right.
But he
It's
would be
the
fine.
opportunity cost of what you don't have in that DP place when he's taking it up is the biggest thing. It's less of a complaint about him and more of a complaint about who he's not.
In the DP convo, though, can I just say, Bukhari looks fun. Like the few minutes we've seen, he's got a bag of tricks, and he's not scared to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super exciting about him. Listeners will know I've got like Mikael Dessler is my soccer crush at the moment.
You are.
I was
He's
super
over the
high
top
on him
about it,
since
yeah.
the rumor started,
Nice.
and he's been super good. Like I'm very happy with like he's everything I hoped he would be. So Bukhari I think is going to be like he's shown that he's got magic in him, but Dessler is one of these guys who just like I have referred to him as like the right back version of Robin Lod. Like you know exactly what you're getting from him every week,
Super
and it's going to
clean,
be really good.
Yeah. I think they're from what I've heard, they're very excited about those two ads. And if you get one or two guys that you can lean on, especially Bukhari, then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, Giassi Zard is still a pretty good soccer player. Diego Rubio is a decent soccer player. Hutter O'Brien has his moments. It's when you take them away from being the stars, like you talked about with Alex Ring, of like when they can lean on someone else, when someone else can carry the game for long stretches, then you start to say like this group can be competitive, and then you start to see the holes of like, where are we one or two pieces away? And I think that's been, as we started this whole thing, the frustrating part with Austin of how similar the team was to start this year as it was to last year.
David, you're making us feel really smart right now by saying a lot of the stuff that we've been saying.
I got you.
Yeah, okay. So before we let you go, you sort of touched on, or we've talked about like the importance of independent media, like covering the league, and now that you are independent media, maybe like what does that mean? What for like different perspective does that give for fans? Like, do we see more of it down the road? I know it's like the media model is very tough in terms of like finances right now, but like what's your crystal ball vision of that for the future?
I have zero idea. I wish I had a better answer on the crystal ball, because then I would be making more money and doing more things. It's all about the growth of the league, right? If there's more fans that care, then there's more people that want coverage. I will say a positive thing about MLS, one of the positive things, or one of the few, whichever term you want to go with, is pretty much every expansion market has hit over the last 5-7 years. And each expansion market brings in 20 to 200,000 fans like out the gate, right? You immediately are selling out a stadium. You've immediately got supporter sections. You immediately have this tentpole thing that those people in that area care about. And so now you can pull those fans in. So I think that's where there's opportunity, is like there are more hardcore fans and there are more people who care. And the growth is coming less from finding more fans to bring in, and the fact that like each market brings in a ton of new fans every single time. And I think we've seen it in the strength of some of the coverage in some of those markets. Like Cincinnati has done really well with the coverage they have of their team. St. Louis has done really well. You guys know, of course, there was, the Strikers started out of Austin and all of that. And so I think when you find those markets where then you can have a base where you can guarantee something off of, then you can start to take some risks and grow a little bit. And I think everyone's hope is with the World Cup coming in 2026 and hopefully another World Cup coming in 2031, that there will be these bigger events to bring more money into the ecosystem. In terms of why it's important, I think you want differing opinions. You want debate. Like, this is why sports are fun, right? We can all have different points of view, and we can complain about stuff and yell about stuff and say ridiculous things. It's something that brings us all together. It's a little bit harder when it's controlled by the entity that's being discussed. It's hard to make fun of something that pays you and operates you.
As good as MLS has done at like being their own, like waving their own flag and kind of like priming the pump to get more media because no one else was doing it. And so they had to kind of fill that space. But it's getting to a point now where like the attention is growing, and it's not healthy to have the primary like media body be owned and their paychecks paid by the league. And I'm not criticizing anybody who's doing that. If you can make that money, get it. But it's like it has to be a healthy thing for there to be more things happening outside of that bubble.
And it's, I think, the way any of the healthy leagues operate is you have external entities, talking about and covering things that internal entities wouldn't. And it creates more conversation and it creates more buzz. And, I'm sure you guys see this even with your own numbers. Signings and rumors, that's what drives attention. That's the moments that grab people outside of the games. And so if you're not broadcasting the games, the other things that are happening around those are these news stories, which are not something that you're going to come out and be like, oh, hey, yeah, we might trade our left back. Also, we'll see him at training later. Like, that will be fun. You need to have entities outside of that are covering things. So that's our hope in what we're trying to do. I think there's also, we don't 100% know exactly what our fans do want because we haven't really gotten to do it yet. And so I think I'm learning already, like, what people engage with and what people react to. And maybe it's not always transfer rumors or firings and stuff like that. Although it tends to be a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so angry fans will always show up. Happy fans will come half the time. Angry fans are there 100% of the time. Nothing drives us like rage. And so I think that's a large part of it as well. But I think it's the only way to have a true standard healthy league. And so I think it's part of the ecosystem. It's not the only part of it, but I think it has to be a part of it.
Do you think we ever get to a point where MLS is covered as like a true top 5 sport in America? Or do you think that era is kind of gone and MLS is going to move into whatever comes next, where it is a more segmented market where stuff like Soccer-Wise is kind of the thing, or like other smaller things that are happening in, I guess, like more numbers but smaller reach? Yeah. Is that going to be kind of the model forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one of those I think a lot of people are chasing, which is like, again, like you guys said, we don't know where media exists. I guess if you were to ask what's the formula for it to happen, it follows the popularity of the league and the players. And I think that starts with the U.S. winning a 2026 World Cup and those players becoming stars and those players coming into Major League Soccer. And then that adds on top of the next set of the Messis and the Girouds and the Griezmanns. And I do think there is a way in which MLS is seen as a legitimate top 5 league on the men's side, at least in America. I think there's a good chance NWSL jumps a lot of this, and MLS then is sort of following NWSL's model, because that's, I think, what we're about to see is like as Mal Swanson and Trinity Rodman and Sophia Smith come back to the U.S. and start traveling around the country and playing now post a gold medal. That's the model that MLS is going to try and follow on the men's side, and we're going to see how it works and how people engage with it and how it gets covered and what you can do to spur that forward. But that would be the formula for the league to get big enough. And if it does, then it will get talked about in all of those places. But I think even when you look at like, and this is not my expertise, but even when you look at like MMA and stuff like that, it is still normally an expert brought in. It is not the host is an expert, right? The hosts can do NFL and MLB playoffs and NBA by themselves, but they're still going to bring someone in to talk those other sports, even though they'll do it regularly. I think that's probably best case scenario that you're getting to with MLS over the next 10 to 15 years.
All right. Well, Tom, I almost called you Tom Bogert. David, thanks.
No one can see my mustache right now because it's a podcast.
That's what I'm saying.
Thanks so much for joining us. This has been a pleasure, and we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Everyone listen to Soccer Wise if you get the chance. And join our Patreon so you can jump into our Discord, which I know you are in. And you guys can go in there and yell at me and then talk to me. And we can do all those things, and we can talk about soccer. And I'm always happy to talk Austin FC in there. And hopefully be on once again when we do a playoff preview at some point over the next 5 to 10 years.
Oh, man. Hopefully sooner.
All right. Thanks, David.
Moon Tower Soccer is brought to you by Sage Wilson Realty. The team is made up of Austin experts who are client-focused and have over 30 years of combined real estate experience. Our friends at Sage Wilson Realty are giving away 2 tickets to an upcoming match. You can fill out the form in the show notes for your chance to win.
If you or someone you know are in need of Sage Real Estate advice in Austin, talk to our friends at Sage Wilson Realty. Be sure to check them out online at sagewilson.com.
Moon Tower Soccer's premier sponsor is McGuire Woods Consulting, helping clients in the public affairs space from lobbying at the local, statewide, and federal levels to digital and communications campaigns across the country.
McGuire Woods Consulting has offices in 10 MLS cities and is proud to support Moon Tower Soccer and Austin FC's march to the playoffs. Contact our friends at McGuire Woods Consulting at mwcllc.com for more information. All right, we're back. We want to thank David Goss one more time. We are going to get to a few more listener questions, but first, Jeremiah, let's do our Nashville preview. Catch us up on what Nashville has been up to for the last year.
Well, one thing that's kind of funny is I feel like Austin plays Nashville a lot, but this is actually the first time since 2022 that these clubs have played, because we had that period of time when Nashville was in the Western Conference, and they're not anymore. We had that trip to Nashville. It was like the second time in 3 weeks the teams had played. It was sort of the deciding factor in the great Mukhtar versus Driussi MVP debate of 2022. But it's been a while, and the clubs are equally successful or unsuccessful, I think, since then. So Nashville currently sitting 12th in the Eastern Conference, on a pretty bad run of form across all competitions. They have, in the last 5 matches, they have 4 losses and they have a draw. In May, fired Gary Smith, who was 7 years into being the only coach in team history, added U.S. men's national team legend B.J. Callahan as the new coach starting in July 31st. This is going to be, I think it'll be his second match in charge. So he's coached 1 game, which is Leagues Cup's match against Mazatlan. So brand new day for Nashville for sure. Yeah.
So as far as new players in, I think they brought in 2. One of them being Jonathan Perez on loan from the Galaxy, a younger guy. I'm not sure how much he's going to factor in. The other one is a midfielder, Patrick Yazbek, an Australian player who has played in at least a few games already and looks quite good, like a pretty good addition. One question I had that I was doing some research on is, like, what is their style going to be like under BJ Callahan? Because when they were at their best, they would defend deep, really organized, hard to break down, and then they would hit you on the counter, and it would end with Mukhtar scoring a goal somehow. All that has not been working as well as it did in 2022. And then it's not the way BJ Callahan seems like he's going to want to play. So based on interviews he's given, it seems like he's going to want to keep the ball a little bit more and maybe implement more of a counter pressing system as opposed to just sitting super deep, which is all great. I think these address criticisms that Nashville has gotten over the last few years, but do they have the players to do it now? And how quickly can he actually change that? Like, what is that going to look like in this specific game?
Yeah, I think I was just going to say, that's like a super fair question, because it's a club that was already pretty thin. It feels like the guys they've added during the offseason. You mentioned Pettis. I think he played like 6 games for Galaxy. So, like, it's not like a Minnesota kind of summer window where they've added like a whole bunch of talent that now has to be integrated. So there's not a lot of changes in the players so far. So, like, it'll be interesting to see what he does with the time he has.
Yeah. Anything else on Nashville?
Yeah, I'm just a couple, like Hani Mukhtar, for whatever offense they have, which is not a lot. 5 goals, 5 assists, still the person that draws that. A guy we haven't seen is Sam Surridge. who leads the team with 8 goals, coming over from England late in 2023. So this is one of those, like if Austin's going to pick up the 13 or 14 points that Austin needs to make the playoffs this season, this is definitely where you have to pick up at least 1, and we would really like to see 3 to give Austin a little bit of breathing room for other things that might happen later in the year.
Yeah, 3 would be really, really good from this game for the reasons you mentioned. Like, if you're going to win one on the road, this seems like one of the better candidates for that to be a possibility. So, yeah, 3 points would be excellent. Looking at the Austin side, what do we think we're going to see from Austin coming out? Like, so Bukhari and Dessler are, I think they both have played close to 80 minutes or so in the last game. So they're getting close to being 90 minutes fit. So we're guessing we'll see both of them for most of this game. Will we see Svatak in this game? I'm guessing he's maybe not ready to, like, ideally you don't want to have to take a center back out.
Right.
And so it's harder to kind of plan around like a planned sub for a center back as opposed to a winger. And so I think it's a little harder to say, oh, we'll play him 60 and then pull him. Like that, it makes less sense for a center back. So for that reason, it might be like a situational thing late in the game. If the occasion seems good for it, maybe you throw him in for 20 or 30.
Yeah, and I feel like you're right. I think if we see him, it'll be on the other end of that. You'll get Hedges and Heinzike or Cascante and Heinzike or maybe Cascante and Hedges or whatever you get. And then you're just, depending upon game state and whether Austin's ahead or behind or whatever, then you get Svatak sometime. If he's not ready to go the whole match, I don't see any way that you bring him in knowing he's not going to play 90. And it's against a team like Nashville. It doesn't score a lot of goals. It should be where Austin has the luxury of like, being able to like work him in, and not really desperately needing help in the middle. But I think I'm also ready to see him play. Yeah,
for sure. I think just given what we know about Nashville's style and just like how relatively poor they've been this year, that stylistically what we see from Austin, I'm guessing it's probably going to look closer to what we saw against LAFC than what we saw against the Mexican sides in Leagues Cup. Just again, because you can't make a team keep the ball, and you don't want to just give it to them if they can't make you give it to them. And so I think it's going to lean more that direction. Are they going to sit as deep as LAFC? Probably not. Are they going to counter like as well as LAFC was able to? Probably not. So maybe we can see some of that fluidity, some of that just really clear movement about the field that we did against LAFC, and hopefully they can put together some end product in it as well.
Yeah, I would like to see that with Giassi Zardes up top, though, and not the Sebastian Driussi false 9 thing they did against LA. Because I just don't think it's like a long-term recipe for success.
Yeah, and if it is, it's with another attacking midfielder who can fill the Driussi-sized hole.
That's very fair. It's fair. Not how the roster is constructed today.
Right. Anything else before we go to listener questions?
Now let's hit a few listener questions that we didn't get to last week, and then I think we'll get some new ones this week too.
All right, let's start with Jane Kurosawa Cravey. She asks, okay, in the spirit of no stupid questions, I have 2. A, what constitutes a foul? With all the pushing, shoving, and tripping going on, it's really hard for the uninitiated to tell. And then B, would you explain how to interpret the XG, XGA, and XGD numbers? I've read online, but still don't understand how to interpret them when comparing each of them. Let's start with the first one. What constitutes a foul?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question. The way it's written with all the pushing, shoving, and tripping is hard to tell. And I feel like a lot of times it's an aggregation of those. When you push and shove and trip, at some point, the official is going to come over to you and tell you, stop doing that, or you're going to get a foul, or you're going to get a card, even more than that. And that's really what it comes down to. I don't know.
And so often it's like the reciprocity as well. If two guys are leaning on each other or come against each other really hard, like that's often fair game under rules of thumb that are called like 50-50, like they both went into it evenly, that's fair game. Or shoulder to shoulder is another thing you hear a lot. Like, okay, there was contact there, but it was shoulder to shoulder, meaning both players had equal opportunity and equal force going into it. That will often not be called. It's when the force gives the offender an advantage. That is often what gets called a foul. It's all super subjective in this game, like everything is, right? But that's kind of a rule of thumb that gets followed. So for expected goals, do you want to take this one?
Oh man, yeah. It's like I feel like we could have done, a day's worth of research and also more than we have done, and probably have an equally good answer for that. So yeah, expected goals are, like shots taken based upon like generic conditions, from the field. And it's super weird because it doesn't consider like the play leading up to the shot. I don't think it really considers like how open a player is or not, right? So if it's just like a bounce at a one time, so it's like very much a moment in time stat that people probably think too much about.
Yeah, and yeah, so I guess like a TLDR version is if you take a single shot and look at where it was on the field, what is the likelihood of that shot going in when comparing it statistically to shots that have been taken from all over the field? So part of the confusion with XG is that it is a stat not really meant to be applied to a single shot. It works best and is most accurate whenever you take hundreds of shots. And so XG over the course of a given season for a team is often a pretty accurate number. XG in a single game is probably not a very good number and not very indicative of what that team is or who they are. But when you see trends go on, that is where it becomes relevant. And we probably talk about XG too much and put too much stock in XG on a single game basis.
Yeah, and on single shot, that's a really good point you talked about, because like if Julio Cascante and Sebastian Driussi take the same shot from the same space, it's going to have the same XG, right? Because it's just
right
the opportunity in the aggregate. Obviously, Driussi's going to put that ball in the back of the net way more often than Cascante is, and it's not something that's factored in, to that. But yeah, it's like a season-long statistic. And then I think you should add to the comment on the end that you didn't read.
Oh,
since you're a sock nerd.
She adds, by the way, Landon, love the socks. They look great on full display with shorts. Thank you, Jane. I've already said how much I like the socks, so I'll stop there.
I like the socks too. Let's go to this question from Jeff. He says it comes to mind after listening to August 13th. What do you think happens with the captaincy in 2025, and what does Austin need from whoever is the captain? In order of current likely options, Ringer may or may not be here, though I'd argue he's the fiery type we need. Driussi has been better without the added pressure of the arm brand. Cascante may or may not be here. He would be the captain if he's here in regular starter. Stuver as a keeper doesn't seem to be an option, especially with the new rule that we believe is coming in about only captains talk to the officials. I guess that all seems pretty spot on from a general take. Would you disagree with anything in here? And then, given that, who else do you maybe consider being the captain?
Yeah, I thought about this for a while, and the conclusion that I personally came to is that we are all overthinking the captain thing a little bit, but I think this all stems from the captain thing being overthought by Josh Wolff or whoever was behind all of the shakeup at the beginning. It's complicated now, and I think that's hard to fix, but just give it to whoever the leader of the team is. Have guys vote on it. I don't care. I don't think it matters that much. And so by making a big deal of it, you're making a big deal of it. And I don't think it should be a big deal.
Yeah, to your point, it became a big deal when it got pulled from Ring, right?
Right.
Before then, nobody ever talked about it. I think it's super interesting captain choice, especially with what we've seen from him over the last few months, would be Danny Pereira, who I think has the respect of the team. He is a leader.
Know.
You don't like Danny? He's calming people down now. If Alex Ring is gone, If Alex
He's
Dominguez
also
gone,
still the person that anybody would say, like, if you had a daughter his age, who would you least like on the team to date them? Everybody's still answering Danny. I don't know if that's the captain quite yet. Maybe one day. But I think with the players that are being brought in, like Swatzhawk, Dessler were both captains on teams at one point. Stuver is always an option. Like, there's probably going to be some other guys get brought in. So I think there are options, but again, just don't overcomplicate it. Like, have the players vote. Just have
I like that.
They've said I think that's the way it's done in some teams. Just keep it simple.
all right. Well, how about Trevor Allison? Because I kind of like this. How would you improve soccer for the Olympics? Would you add futsal 7-a-side, change the age group for men, get rid of 11 for men's and women's? I think it's an interesting question. I do think it's interesting that, like, you know, on the women's side, it's the full national teams. On the men's side, it's the U23. And I guess it's just because, like, FIFA hates competition. Is that basically what it comes down to?
I think that's probably a lot of it. Like, FIFA had the monopoly on world soccer competition by the time soccer was part of the Olympics. And then the women, like, have generally fewer tournaments that they're playing in and fewer competing things for the players' time and energy. And so I wouldn't want to change the women's side of it. It is a big deal on the women's side. And I don't think we should change it. Like, let it be a big deal until there's reasons why it shouldn't be. But I don't think there's any reason to meddle with that. It's a good thing. Let's keep it a good thing. For the men, yeah, it is weird just because it's a fun little youth tournament. But yeah, in the end, like, I think maybe you leave that there as it is because it is still good experience for young players to go play in. But I think adding an additional thing would be a lot of fun. And you could treat it like teams treat like the 3-on-3 basketball or something, where it's guys who maybe aren't getting called in to the national team who don't, like, if you do like 7v7, like Tyler Adams isn't going to go play in that. The guys who are playing year round already, that's part of the problem, is that they play too many games in a year by adding more games. That's just exacerbating an existing problem. But you could have guys who aren't getting called in the national team, or like Cuspers, go play in a futsal thing or 7-a-side. I think that would be a lot of fun. And I mean, the Olympics adds stuff to make it more exciting all the time. And I think that would be exciting.
Yeah, I would love a futsal team to be. I feel like that would be like sort of, in a way, a little bit like indoor volleyball and beach volleyball, where it's like kind of a different game. And you get a different enough like set of players that it would, and it's like it makes it more interesting. Like, because I feel like the basketball, like 3-on-3, is just like people who aren't good enough to play like full court, you know, like 5-on-5 are playing. And I feel like futsal's a different enough game where it would be a fun one to watch.
I think we have one more here from Beef Jerky. They say, what do you think will happen the rest of the year with Austin FC choosing the U22 focused construction versus the DP focused one? Are we going to sign a bunch of U22 players before the end of the year? The answer is no, because we don't have roster spots.
Nope. Yeah, we get it a little bit with Goss too, or we did get it a little bit with Goss too, where there are, it would, in theory, there's the chance for Austin to add players, but there's no space for Austin to be able to do that. And
if we did, it'd have to be a free agent, so currently unattached to a club. If it required any type of negotiation or transfer with another club, that's not allowed at this point. So you could bring in a free agent, but looking around at like free agents available, there's nobody who's like not going to take an international roster spot and not going to take a senior roster spot that is going to make a difference on the rest of Austin's season. And if you look at like Transfermarkt has a page of free agents, and if you look at players who most recently played in MLS or for an MLS club, at the top of like the value listing there, like ranked number 3 or 4 is
are you gonna say Rodney Redis?
Ocampo Chavez.
Oh, okay. AOC, yeah.
And like, he didn't play for this team the first time he was here. Like, if that's what we're choosing from, like, there's no point. So if there's, I did look around to see if like, okay, maybe we are able to like transfer someone abroad. Maybe we sell Vicenen or Cascante or to another country somehow. That could still happen now. That opens up a spot. We have a DP spot technically available now. the only name that I could find that made even a little bit of sense, and it still doesn't really make sense, is Sergi Roberto from Barcelona. So he announced that he's leaving Barcelona, still in talks with a bunch of clubs. There's been smoke that he's going to be one of the players to join his Barca buddies in Miami. But he was also in the Barca Academy the same time that Burrell was coaching there. And the age, I didn't find any direct link, but the age groups matched up to like Burrell actually maybe coached Sergi Roberto. And so if there's a thing where like he's hoping for a Miami move, or he doesn't want to go to Saudi Arabia or whatever, and the end of the season, Burrell's like, or like this season, we sell someone and we have this spot. Burrell calls him, is like, hey, Miami didn't work out, but if you want to come to Austin, we'll take you. That's still so far fetched and so unlikely to happen.
that's a lot of fan fiction. So you're not into the Carlos Vela could solve our striker problems position, which I've seen a couple times.
A Carlos Vela would be great to have. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's said, like, if he's going to play in the U.S., it's going to be L.A. And if it's not L.A., it's nowhere. And so, yeah, I mean, and also, when's the last time you played? Like,
it's been a while. That's true. And, you know, man, the thing with the Leagues Cup, which I wanted to ask Goss about and I forgot, it's just like, if we've mentioned this, but where it comes in the season is like such a pain. Like, we're in the final stretch now. This is not like bring a guy in and let him have a few games to get up to speed, right? Anybody you add needs to contribute immediately to this club because there's only 9 regular season games left.
Yeah. I think we got them all. Is there anything else?
No, I think we covered it.
All right. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'd like to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Come find us on Twitter. I'm at LVHero87. Jeremiah's at JBentley_ATX. And at Moon Tower Soccer on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Sign up for the Patreon. We would greatly appreciate that. If we've brought you joy or taught you something over the years and you're in a spot where you can support us, please do so. That is probably where most of our financial support comes from at this point. I think that's true. And so it greatly helps us, helping us buy equipment that we need, helping us just support the show in a way that is sustainable. And if you're in a place where you can't do that, no problem at all. That's totally fine. But if you can and you want to, we'd greatly appreciate it. I think that's all. Thanks so much for listening. Next week, we'll be back with the review of the Nashville match and then preview Austin's return to Q2 against Vancouver. And then we'll cover whatever other Austin FC news happens. Until then, I'm Landon Cottam.
I'm Jeremiah Bentley.
We'll catch you next time.
When no one is around.
Thank for nothing, see you never.
La gente. Oh my God.